Welcome back to strategiccorporateresearch.org. In today's video, we'll take an in-depth look at financial ratios. We'll begin by discussing what are financial ratios and how are they such powerful tools in financial analysis. Secondly, we'll look at ratios in four specific areas: liquidity, profitability, debt management, and asset management. And then third, we'll jump back into our examination of Verizon, and we'll look at their financial ratios over a 3-year period, as well as comparing them with their competitors. So let's get started. Why financial ratios? Well, I think as many of us have realized, there are real limits to eyeballing financial statements, and we need more precise tools to examine those statements. And ratios are one way to do this, because ratios combine two or more pieces of data. In this way, they normalize the data, which allow us to compare across companies. There are no reasons anymore to calculate financial ratios by hand. They're available from a number of different sources, although you will want to stick with the same source as calculation methods and the exact formulas may vary. And there are many industry-specific ratios. Today, we're going to look at ratios in four specific areas. Ratios that deal with liquidity, profitability, debt management, and asset management. So let's turn to our first financial ratio, which is about liquidity. It's called the current ratio. And the current ratio is your current assets divided by current liabilities. And if the current ratio is greater than 1, then it means you have more current assets than you have liabilities. If the current ratio is less than 1, that means you have more current liabilities than current assets. In terms of the accepted standard, it's going to vary dramatically by industry. But if it's too low of a ratio, you may be unable to meet your obligations. But if it's too high, you may have too conservative a growth plan. And loan rates are often tied to maintaining a certain current ratio. The next ratio is a profitability ratio. It's your return on assets. And the ROA, as it's called, is your income before taxes, which we know is your operating income, divided by your assets. And essentially, this is a measure that says how well do you use your assets to generate income. The accepted standard, again, it varies by industry and the amount of your fixed assets. A low ratio means a poor use of your assets. And a high ratio means you're a strong performer. So in terms of the return on assets, the higher, the better. The next ratio we'll look at is debt management. That is the debt to equity ratio. And that is literally what it says. It's the ratio of debt to equity. The accepted standard is it should be less than 0.8, although again, this varies by industry. If your ratio is too low, then you're too fiscally conservative. And if your rates are too high, then they're too risky. So in addition to the debt to equity ratio, we also want to look at how well you're able to cover your interest over time. And interest coverage is your operating income divided by your interest obligation. And as you can see conceptually, you obviously don't want your operating income to equal your interest obligation. We want much more operating income than we want interest obligation. Again, it varies by industry. Too low a ratio indicates you're too heavily burdened by debt, and too high a ratio means you're too conservative in your borrowing. Let's do a quick review here in terms of these financial ratios. Current ratio, high, good to a point. Return on assets, higher the better. Debt to equity, lower, good to a point. And interest coverage, higher, good to a point. So now let's jump back into Verizon and take a look at its financial ratios. This comes from Mergent Online, and I've annotated it with my highlight. So let's first look at the liquidity ratios. And as you can see, the current ratio was 0.91 in 2017, stayed the same in 2018, and dropped a bit in 2019 to 0.84, which means that they have 84 cents in assets for every dollar they have in liabilities. But let's go to the top of the page and look at return on assets. In 2017, it was 12.01, which meant for every dollar they had in assets, they were generating $12 in income. That dropped down to $5.95 in 2018, and back up to $6.92 in 2019. Let's move down to debt management and first look at debt to equity. And here you can see Verizon's debt to equity has gone down. It began at 2.72 in 2017, dropped down to 2.13 in 2018, and then dropped down to 1.82 in 2019. And what that means is it has $1.82 in debt for every dollar it has in equity, but clearly moving in the right direction. You can see the same in terms of interest coverage, the next line. In 2017, it was 5.82, dropped down to 4.7, but went back up to $6.59 in 2019, which means that for every dollar that Verizon is paying in interest coverage, it has $6.59 in operating income. So I think you can see the power of looking at these financial ratios. They really help us to understand the balance sheet and the income statement. Now let's go to the next level and look at Verizon's competitors. And here we have Verizon, we have T, which is the ticker symbol for AT&T, and then TMUS, the ticker symbol for T-Mobile. And let's look at the four ratios to see how Verizon compares with its competitors. First, let's look at the current ratio. And here you can see that T-Mobile seems to have the lowest current ratio, followed by AT&T and then Verizon at 0.84. So in this sense, Verizon is the strongest performer in terms of its current ratio. In terms of return on assets, also what you see here is that Verizon is a leader in the industry. It's able to generate $6.92 of income from its assets. T-Mobile is considerably lower, and AT&T can only deliver $2.57. Moving down to debt to equity, you can see here that Verizon has the highest debt to equity. Although at 1.82, that's not excessive, but it's almost double of AT&T's indebtedness or T-Mobile's. But let's remember that Verizon is much more able to generate income based on its assets in terms of its ROA. So AT&T may in fact not be indebted enough if it's not able to return on its assets. Verizon also has the highest interest coverage. For every dollar of interest liability, it has $6.59 in operating income. Much lower for AT&T, $3.32, and T-Mobile is somewhat in the middle. So again, I think you can see the power of this comparative analysis. And we aren't simply eyeballing a balance sheet or an income statement. We can, with these ratios, actually compare Verizon with its two competitors. And clearly from these financial ratios, that although Verizon is slightly more indebted than its competitors, it's outperforming them in terms of its return on assets. I hope you found this video useful. Thank you.